Hey, I'm Jess.
And I'm Ryan, and you're listening to Your Therapist is Not Okay.
Today's episode is all about listener questions. We asked on Instagram to have a rapid fire of your questions, and this is our answers to them.
First of all, I want to thank you all so much for your questions. We really appreciate it. We love the engagement, and answering listener questions is really one of our absolute favorite things.
Yeah, we got a lot of them coming through our DMs, and so we grabbed all of them. All of your questions are going to be answered today. So let's dive in with number one. Someone asked, what inspired us to start this podcast?
Hmm. So actually, it was a really cool question to receive because the biggest answer to this is listener questions. We were presenting at a conference about kind of the veneer of therapy that we've spoken about in this podcast. And in that presentation, we gathered some questions from the audience about, well, what do you wonder about your therapist? And there were so many questions that we thought were
Yeah.
really interesting and insightful that we were like, wow, we really need to talk about this more and learn about how do people maybe struggle with the kind of some of the mysteries and some of the assumptions around therapy.
We wanted to start a book for a while about kind of diving into breaking this veneer that your therapist is all knowing and realize that social media is one of the greatest places to start with that. We can actually understand what questions people have, what gets the most engagement. And so, in some ways, it's almost like a living outline for us to start to see what would actually make a really good book about this.
hmm Another listener asked, and this I think was probably based on the recent episodes we did about lying and therapy. Um, so someone has asked, so you always know when I'm lying to you?
I am so happy you asked this question because I've noticed by a lot of the comments, there is an assumption that we know you're lying. In our actual podcast on this, we say a resounding no, we do not. We are not mind readers. We have no idea necessarily if you're lying. And very honestly, it's not the first thing on our minds. When we are engaging with our clients, we take them at their word.
Yep. And it's just not the thing that's on our mind. We trust our clients. Exactly
Mhm.
as you said, Jess. And there might be moments where we kind of wonder, like, is this something here's not adding up?
Mhm.
But for me, and I think for Jess too, this is not an interrogation or a fact-finding mission. It's about getting to know your truth.
Yes, exactly. The next question that came up, are there workshops you guys do for therapists, especially as I'm still in practicum?
Mm.
Wowee, good question.
Based on speaking order, the Wowie was like it was my time to kind of go, but it's a Jess thing. So I'm so glad that you gave it to us, Jess.
You really like when I say wowee.
I love when you say Wowie. Listeners, I don't know if you are aware of this, but Jess is fantastic, and I love the way she speaks. And we are really excited that we're coming up on our annual psychodynamic workshop. It's a workshop we offer to any therapist. Could be someone in practicum, could be someone who's been in practice for a long time and wants to learn more about the psychodynamic approach. It's the 3 day intensive where we start with teaching some of the theory and ideas behind psychodynamic, and then we do two back-to-back days of exploring how does this show up in yourself, and then how does this show up in your practice with clients. And we talk about how we can use psychodynamic principles and those approaches regardless of modality. You don't have to be an entirely psychodynamic therapist to take some inspiration and learning from this modality.
Ryan and I both met doing our doctorates in psychodynamic practice and specifically relational psychodynamic. And so for us, for the past years, we've actually loved to be able to share this knowledge. If you are a therapist of any modality and you want to take this workshop, follow us at Centered Self Toronto on Instagram, or your therapist is not okay and send us a DM. You'll find out all the details coming up pretty soon. It's happening in April.
The next question we have is, how do therapists navigate the therapeutic relationship with clients who have an avoidant attachment?
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. Ryan, when they were thinking about this question, they literally said, We avoid them.
But it was a joke. Here I am under the bus. I do not avoid them. Mostly a joke because I might be a little avoidant myself.
Usually, one of the things that happens with avoidant clients is that trust is hard to come by. Usually, if you have avoidant attachment, you've learned early on that relying on others may not be your safest option. So often we'll rely on ourselves. We are the trustworthy person because we won't fail ourselves necessarily. Therefore, trusting your therapist is going to take time. And in my
Hmm.
opinion, often with avoidant clients, that aspect of building a relationship with someone you trust is as much part of the work than what you're bringing. So it's actually a really neat space for that. Trust the process and really start to, I would say, allow your therapist to see parts of you that feel safe so that you slowly build trust to show them things that might not be safe.
Thinking about this too, one of the really meaningful things that can happen is there's kind of an inevitability that your therapist will disappoint you in some way, just like any person in this world. We might be sick and have to cancel our session, or maybe we're out of town for a holiday we planned months in advance, but you really wish we could have been there for a session. Being able to come back and talk about that disappointment in a safe relationship can be a way to heal those attachment wounds.
Mhm. Okay, this one's a big one.
Mm.
What's the hardest part of being a therapist?
I think for me, it's kind of like all the assumptions and thoughts that people have to share about therapy and therapists. I get this kind of from every angle, whether it's with friends and family, um, or just random people who ask what I do, and then they have, a question or something to say, or like, it's a field that everyone has thoughts about.
It's true. People's eyes do not glaze over when we say we're therapists. But at the same time, I find it can be really tricky to be off the clock. If I'm somewhere out and about at a party or whatever, and I get asked what I do for a living, I almost have an internal shudder because it's not uncommon for someone to hear that I'm a therapist and be like, "Oh, wow, you're gonna love this." And I have to remind them, like, I'm not working right now. I would like to not provide free therapy.
Right. Here you're gonna love my messy story.
Yes.
No.
I'd much rather get to know you and not immediately have to work. Yeah.
Hmm.
And we talked about in our politics episode too about when things hit everyone at the same time. It's not like we're unhit by that.
Right. Yeah. And I know we talked about before how that can kind of be a double whammy of like we're going through that with the example of like the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're also supporting people who are going through that. So that can kind of put some strain for sure.
Mhm.
Another person asks us, can I ask my therapist personal questions?
I find that a lot of clients get scared that they're not allowed to get to know us. And every therapist has their own line in the sand about what they want to answer. I think for myself and Ryan, we would actually be fine with your questions. We can let you know if there's something that we don't necessarily feel is something we want to answer. But generally speaking, if you're going to ask us a question, most of the time we're happy to answer you. It's a way for you to get to know us.
Yeah. And I think kind of for me, what stands out is if you have a question for your therapist, ask it. Ball's in their court and they can let you know if it feels inappropriate or like something they're not comfortable with. It doesn't have to be your responsibility to monitor your questions.
Oh, yeah. And when it comes to self-disclosure like that about ourselves, sometimes it can actually be really helpful. In January, I took a month off because I had to go to present at a conference with you, Ryan, and then we both were presenting at the university. Letting my clients know that there was a reason for me taking this time off meant that after I got back, they asked me, like, how was it? And I felt very happy to share about some of the exciting things that were happening at the conference and how I felt kind of proud about getting asked, you and I, to present in Athens next year. That was something very comfortable for me to be able to share. It allowed my clients to get to know me more, also kind of equalize the relationship in some ways that this wasn't a mysterious taking time off work, but actually something they could share in with me.
Mm. Being a relational therapist, one of the things that I almost always do, and this is kind of can be a funny story that leads to forgetful habits of mine. I always want to know why people have a question. So what I usually do is say, like, I'm going to answer your question, but I wonder if first you could talk to me about why this is important to you. There's some questions, it's obvious and it's not. I don't need to go into that. But sometimes there could be something about the relationship and the process of therapy in there. So I ask, being a forgetful person, I then sometimes forget to answer the original question. And I
Yeah,
have spoken to clients before that are like, well, you never answered my question, so I assumed I couldn't ask anymore. And I'm so sorry, is what I'm having to say. Here's the answer. I just forgot. You can always let me know if I forgot something.
that is a very good point. Next question is, oh, okay. Do
Mm.
therapists ever get nervous about talking to clients?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. When we talk about this with students as well as any other practitioner, therapists are still human. We get nervous just like we get sad and we get angry, and that's a lot of what we're about here, kind of breaking that veneer and saying like your therapists are still people with feelings and problems, and it's our responsibility to navigate those, and put them to the side when we're being a therapist. But, a common example of nervousness is going to be first sessions.
Hmm.
We're used to them and we're able to contain our feelings, and at the same time, we're meeting a new person.
Hmm.
So there's always a little nervousness. And sometimes for myself and others I've spoken to, it can also come up that like feeling a little nervous because we want to do right by clients
Hmm.
and we might feel a little stuck. And that might be something we ultimately share with clients. Like, wow, it feels like this is a really stuck place as a way to kind of not run from those feelings, because usually the client is feeling it as well.
Likewise, to not running from those feelings. A lot
Mm.
of times, paying attention to our nervousness is not easy, but we kind of have to start doing some inner work. Why is this person making me nervous?
Hmm.
And looking into our own kind of countertransference, recognizing that, bringing that somewhere can actually allow us to not only understand our client more, understand our dynamic more, but maybe also makes us do some personal work to navigate that. I've been doing this for over 11 years, and every single time I have a consult, I get a little bit of like a flutter because I don't know the person yet. Even though I know how to have a consult, how to meet somebody, they're still brand new to me. And I'm human, and I kind of like that I'm not complacent in that it's still something kind of new and exciting for me to get to meet somebody new.
And if you want to kind of hear more about those real human feelings that therapists still have, we did an op episode about imposter syndrome in the past, where we went into a lot more detail on that.
That was actually also a listener question about imposter syndrome. Yeah.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you again, listeners.
Yeah.
Um, our next question asks, who would be your dream guest for the podcast?
We have been toying with the idea though.
Hmm.
So there's somebody that we're actually bringing on, which is really exciting. One of our colleagues, Monica Lau, is really becoming skilled and learning a lot, becoming an expert in psychedelic therapies. And for myself, that's not a new realm of therapy, but it's definitely one that's become quite popular lately. And we're going to bring her on to pick her brain about that. So I think she's going to be my dream guest coming up, actually, because it's something that I wouldn't be able to answer myself. And so it's neat to be able to lean on somebody that actually has a lot more knowledge on this than I do.
Hmm.
Who would be yours, Ryan?
Well, I know I had mentioned once that I thought collabs with other podcasters would be really cool, and I mentioned drag queens, and I do think that having Trixie and Katya together or one of them on our podcast would be amazing because I do drag queens often talk about and do a lot of work with supporting mental health, supporting the LGBTQ
Yeah.
community, and kind of working for their rights. That really is the foundation of, if I could take a soapbox moment, that really is the foundational origin of queer rights movement is from drag queens and trans women. So I think it'd be really cool to feature some of that.
That would be a dream come true.
It would be.
Yeah, we're little now, but one day. Next question, question 9. What if I don't know what to talk about in therapy? Mm,
So that's fine.
yeah,
That's fine. In fact, it's sometimes ideal. I think Jess was sharing in a recent episode that sometimes this is when our best work can happen.
yep.
There is a really old adage that I think is Freud that he talks about. Yeah, it is Freud talks about going into a session without memory or expectation. And that's kind of when you're going to be able to get into deeper stuff and not hold too many assumptions about where we are going to go and where we should go,
Mm.
both as therapist and client. And, we don't take everything from Freud hook, line, and sinker, but he was kind of the founder of talk therapy. So it is, at least in the white Western world, the founder of talk therapy. So it is, it's a good kind of principle to still keep to. And I find that what's most interesting on a deep level kind of bubbles to the surface when we don't have that agenda.
I think that's right because we don't really have a story at hand. And
Mm,
so we can bring up something that might be on the shelf that we maybe brought up weeks ago, but we didn't have time to get dive into. It might be a chance. Often a client will be like, "So what do you want to talk about, Jess?" I'm like, all right, make me work for it. But it usually means that we're able to just stay with something pretty poignant. And I find actually breakthroughs can happen when you start a session like that. Even if it's nerve-wracking for you, it's a conversation between us. I never mind when that question or that statement comes up.
mm, mm. Our next question is one that I think we may talk about for a little longer. We were asked, do therapists ever get tired of hearing people's problems?
Hey, that is a good
Mhm.
one. That's a really good one. I would say no, generally speaking, we don't get tired of listening to what you
Mm,
have to bring. About 2 weeks ago, we actually did a podcast on Am I wasting my therapist's time?
mm,
This was one of the main things that we were kind of addressing, that repeating stories or talking about something again and again can feel like we're not making progress or that I'm bored or any of those things. And I want every client to know you are not wasting anyone's time. I made the reference to myself. I do not know anything I've ever dealt with in my life where I said it one time and I'm just done. I'm just finished with it. And so, why would I ever assume my clients would be able to do that? Often, when we're talking about even the exact same instance, I find we're getting deeper. We're seeing new facets of it. It can actually be very important. And I don't get tired of that. I don't get tired of us navigating the same situation. I often find I'm actually a safe space because a lot of times we get nervous about that with our family and friends. And so
mm.
having a space where we actually are just safe to be able to keep navigating the same thing that's kind of bogging us down can be actually incredibly safe and important.
For me, it's also very much the same thing, even if maybe I have 5 clients that are dealing with a similar issue. I find that when I listen to them, they're actually each so unique and different that it doesn't, I'm not tired of hearing about, struggling with families.
Yeah.
Because each one is going to be unique and really interesting in a different way and allows me to be there for a client as they have like these moments of joy and discovering things about themselves, or these moments where they get to emote something they've been holding on to for a really long time.
The flip side of this is that if we have an unbalanced workload, if we are seeing so many clients in a day, that will lead to burnout for any therapist. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. And that will then lead to what we call compassion fatigue. It's not because of anything a client is necessarily bringing, but because we maybe don't know how to navigate our own workload.
Hmm. And what I really want to reiterate about this is the therapist's responsibility.
Yeah.
With support from their colleagues, with support from their supervisors, to really get to know what are my limits? How often do I need a vacation? how many clients can I see a day, to really know what is sustainable and find that sweet spot. It doesn't mean that we won't ever in the future still have moments of feeling exhaustion. But just like we talk about with mental health, and burnout is a part of mental health, it's about learning the early warning signs and learning how to care for ourselves in that. Or knowing that, hey, this is a really heavy week, so next week I need to plan a lighter week.
Mhm.
Those kind of things that that become part of how we balance our wellness.
A lot of my supervisees ask me what is the sweet spot for myself. I see about 4 clients a day. That might seem like a very small amount to some, but for me, especially working with trauma, it means that my very first client and my very last client of the day has the exact same amount of energy. And I need that. I need it to be for my own ethics. I want every client to have the exact amount of me, so that nobody feels like I'm kind of checked out. And I notice when I'm working a lot more, I might not be able to offer the same. So knowing that in myself is really helpful. And it doesn't mean that I can't see other people like supervisees or have meetings, but when I'm dealing with trauma, for me, it's 4 clients. And that really helps me have the rest of the day to take care of myself.
Mm. I found over the years that one of the most helpful things for me is having a variety of types of work. I love working with clients when I'm doing that. I love consulting. I love having supervisees. And I also really like balancing that with kind of some admin work too, because it can be really nice to be able to have something that is done
Mm.
and done correctly. Which, as we've talked about in other episodes, therapy is not a linear progression. It's
No.
not a check mark when you're done. There are admin tasks that are a check mark you're done. And those I find a little bit satisfying sometimes to kind of balance out the different types of energy that I'm giving to my working life.
Hmm. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Final question. Thank you for all these questions. The last one is it possible to overshare or have TMI in therapy?
I think no,
All right.
definitely not. However, as we've talked about before, vulnerability whiplash, I don't know if we've used that exact term on this podcast before, that can come up when you share something really heavy or something that's maybe always been a secret in the past, or have, one of those sessions where you end up just kind of dumping a lot. You have a lot to share, maybe a big story you want to get out. Maybe it's an early session and you just want your therapist to know, here's everything. Here's the landscape of my struggles.
Mhm.
And then the next day or the next week, you might have some kind of feelings about like, oh gosh, I said so much.
Yeah, that can be really tricky. And it's sometimes, I would say it's not always easy for brand new therapists to know how to hold their clients in that kind of sharing space.
Mm.
Um, so it's not uncommon when we're about to dive into something for me to maybe say, this feels really big. Is this something you want to share today? Or do we want to hold on to that until we may feel safe? And then a client might be like, no, I really want to share it. Perfect. I've got the lay of the land. I've read the room. You're not doing this to please me. That's actually really helpful for me sometimes to just allow the congruence, the honesty to be in this space of being like, where are we together? Because I am so happy if you want to wait till session 12 to tell me something. I really would much rather you feel safe than overshare. And because that whiplash can be quite tricky.
Mm.
And if someone has shared quite a bit, it's really not uncommon for me to actually say, we might feel a certain way tomorrow. And I will actually tell them honestly, I'm like, I am so, so honored you shared that. I do not judge you at all. I'm actually, I think this is a bit of a breakthrough of us being able to share this, but tomorrow might feel a little bit heavy. What can we do together to figure out how to allow tomorrow to be a safe day for you? What do we need to do together to kind of figure out how we can navigate this? Is it journaling? Is it like whatever a client and I
Mhm.
can come up with together? That also allows us to be on the same page or the same side of like, we've got this.
Yeah, because then it's not a isolating experience. That's great. And I also think that this is often when clients might notice their therapist saving a little time at the end for that kind of check-in. so that if you need to hear your therapist say, thank you for sharing, it's okay, that there's that little spot at the end of the time where that can be said and done. This also kind of harkens to our lying episode a little bit. A lot of our comments and our posts for that kind of included this idea of like lying by omission, so to speak. For us, you tell us things when you need to and when you're ready to. We're not scoping out for lies. If you tell us in session 12 that, that something happened or you feel some kind of way, we're not going to say, why didn't you tell me? We're going
Yeah.
to hear you and we're going to thank you.
Hmm. Yeah, unlike a friend that might feel betrayed by that, we're actually excited that you trust us now.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's where I sometimes make mistakes with TMI.
Mm.
I forget that TMI is a thing for people, and I talk about things like sex every day. And so I sometimes forget that I'm not allowed to ask that question. If I never have talked about like masturbation, I'm like, oh, well, tell me more. I'm like, wait, no, wait. I'm comfortable. I need to check myself before I sometimes ask the very like open and like vulnerable question that I think is normal. So sometimes I forget that you might have an aspect of TMI.
That is a good point. That's something we're always kind of navigating with clients. That's maybe one of these unique things about being a therapist is like there's not really that much that's off the table that we're going to be like, "Oh, I'm shocked. I've never heard anything
Yeah.
like that before." Like your story is unique and yet we're maybe a little more on the unflappable side.
Yeah. Which then just means I have to remind myself that I might be unflappable, but that doesn't mean I get to ask you this insanely vulnerable question. So I sometimes will make a joke of that, being like, I have a question that's very normal to me, but might not feel so normal in day-to-day conversation to you.
I love that caveat.
Yeah. Um, you know what, Ryan?
Tell me.
This feels like it could actually be a whole episode, question 11, the idea of oversharing. Because as we're talking about this and laughing, it feels like actually maybe we should spend some more time on this one.
Yeah, there could be definitely more to it. All right. Sounds like next episode.
All right, then. This was fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. Thank you all so much for your questions. We really appreciate the engagement and the way you all are kind of leaning into asking us questions and being curious about therapy. Thanks for tuning in today.
Yeah, it feels like this can be a safe space for people to just allow your questions to come.
Mm,
Keep it up. Um, a lot of our episodes are because of you. So we love this and we love this space. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.